Welcome back to Steel Silk. I'm Lydia, and today I'm going to be introducing you to 5 plants that I think are beginner friendly but not basic. The first plant I'd suggest is a peperomia. It is just basic green foliage, but very cute, and grows these long green stamen, which I think are kind of a fun feature of the plant. Most houseplants are going to require bright, indirect light. Peperomias are no different. Bright, indirect light is what they need. I water my peperomia pretty regularly. They grow fairly quickly, and so their water requirements are a little bit higher as a result, but it's pretty easy to check if the surface of the soil is dry, it needs to be watered. If it's still damp like this guy is, it's good to go. Another variety of peperomia I have is just like this one, but it's called red edge, so it has this red edging around the leaves. Exact same basic care requirements, it's just a little bit different look. And the last peperomia I have is this variegated one, which I think is the most striking out of all of them. Just these big, thick, glossy leaves, really interesting stems on each of the plants, and also easy to grow. One of my favorite things about these plants is that I've also never had any pest issues with them, so they are pretty much a foolproof plant. They do respond really sensitively to the direction of light. So this variegated one in particular is pointed just a little bit more towards you right now. So I do rotate this guy super regularly so that it doesn't get this permanent facing away kind of back side of it. The next plant on my list is an Aglaonema. Common name is Chinese evergreen. This variety, I think, is called Pink Panther, but I got it from Lowe's, I believe, and they don't always label their plants super clearly, so that's just a guess. There are countless different varieties. The silver varieties are a lot more common, so if you look those up, you'll probably recognize it. Aglaonema are easy to find, but if you want a specific variety, that might be a little bit harder to source. These are fairly slow growers, so when I bought it a few years ago, it was maybe 6 inches smaller than it is now, and I could probably encourage it to grow more by fertilizing and sizing up the pot, but it is a nice one if you don't want a massive house plant. It's pretty easy to keep it to a manageable size. This also does best with bright indirect light. If you look at the color of the leaves, mine are quite light right now because it's getting quite a bit of sunlight in the location I have. Nothing direct, but it's really bright indirect light. If I had it in a darker spot, you would see a little bit more of these green leaves and less of the pink. So you can change the color a little bit depending on the amount of sun you are giving it. The key is that if it's too bright, it will burn, and if it's too dark, it will wilt and die. All right, plant number 3 that I think is a good option for beginners are orchids. Now, I debated on whether to talk about orchids because number one, they're very common, and I'm trying to highlight some plants that you might not think of as beginner plants. However, I also think that orchids are often treated like a long-lived bouquet, where you really don't expect them to rebloom or do much of anything after they finish blooming. A lot of people kill orchids. It's kind of just an accepted thing to do, and I want to encourage you that you do not have to kill your orchid. The smaller orchid I have here is at least a year old, and this one I believe is quite a bit older than that, maybe 3 or 4. And both of them are on reblooms. This one has bloomed several times and is just on a new stalk, and then this one actually sent out a secondary stalk from this original stem that it had bloomed on previously, which was also actually a rebloom since I've gotten it. The most important thing I think you can remember about an orchid is that it is an epiphyte, which means that in nature it will be growing just on a tree. It's not planted in dirt, and it's typically in a high humidity environment. My orchids live right next to my kitchen sink, which gets bright and direct light and is a relatively high humidity area simply because of the fact that it's a sink. And so they've always done really well there. I do water them pretty regularly, at least once a week, but you'll notice that this one is planted in lava rock, so it's not going to retain a lot of moisture. And then this one, I haven't repotted it since I got it, so it is still in the original container that it comes potted in. And I water this one quite rarely as a result because it doesn't have a ton of airflow or drainage. And so I water it maybe every 2 weeks. Next up, my absolute favorite houseplants are euphorbia. Euphorbia is a large family of plants, and I have a few different varieties. This is a Euphorbia millie, also known as crown of thorns. It blooms like this most of the year. It is absolutely crazy. It requires bright light, and unlike some plants that can't handle direct light, this one does pretty well with some direct sunlight. The watering for this one is going to be a little bit dependent on the season. It doesn't take very much during the winter when it's a little bit more dormant, and I say a little bit because it still blooms like this year round, but it really pushes out new growth in the spring and summer, and then it'll need a little bit of extra water. Euphorbia are also really easy to propagate, so this is just one example of this Euphorbia millie. I have more than I'm going to admit scattered around my house. One really important thing to know about any Euphorbia is that the sap is incredibly irritating to skin, eyes, anything it touches. So while the plant itself is safe, as soon as you break a branch or cut it off to propagate or anything like that, you're going to want to make sure that you're wearing gloves anytime you handle this plant because your fingers will be on fire. Don't ask me how I know that. This is a Euphorbia tyricale. Common name is pencil cactus. It's another fast grower, easy to propagate, really irritating sap, so just beware when you're handling it of that. This is the fire sticks variety of that pencil cactus. It will get even more orange and red as it grows and as it's exposed to more sunlight. So this is one that you're going to want, again, not necessarily in full sun all day long, but definitely some solid sun in the morning to really bring out that color. The last variety of Euphorbia I have is this Trigona, which is much taller than when I got it 3 or 4 years ago. It is a relatively slow grower, mostly because I've restricted the pot size and the watering. If you water it regularly and pot it up regularly, I have seen them as tall as 8 feet tall and 6 feet wide and still growing. This is how big I want mine, so I don't pot up and I don't water it too much. I've never cut it off to propagate or anything like that, but even occasionally touching the thorns too much will leave your fingers just feeling a little bit irritated, so just beware of that with where you choose to put it. A low traffic area is going to be best for everyone with pretty much any Euphorbia type. The last plant I'm going to highlight today is this dwarf fiddle leaf fig. I bought this one on clearance a few years ago and it had 4 leaves, so it has come a long way since then. If you remember a few years ago, fiddle leaf figs were extremely popular. They were the plant to have. Everyone wanted them, they were insanely expensive, everyone bought one, and then everyone killed one. I believe that there are probably 2 major things going into this, both of them boiling down to overdoing it. The first one is overwatering. This plant is so easy to overwater it. My strategy is to plan to water it about once every 2 weeks, and then when I think of it, I usually wait a few days and then water it. When I water this one, because it is double potted with a closed pot, I really don't want it to just sit in water, so I will let it fully dry out for 2 or 3 weeks, and then I run it under the kitchen sink and then let it dry out in the sink for a few hours at least before it goes back in the pot. Fiddle leaf figs in general are also notorious for not liking change. So once you pick a spot for this one, plan to keep it there long term. This one does not require tons of light, and it can actually burn leaves if it does get too much light. I have mine in a spot where it gets indirect light all day, but almost no direct light at all. Standard fiddle leaf figs can grow insanely tall. This dwarf should top out at about 3 feet, but I've had it for a couple years and it's grown maybe 6 inches total. That's it for my top 5 suggestions for somewhat unusual beginner-friendly plants. Check the link in the description box below for a blog post with all of these listed out. Don't forget to like and subscribe before you go, it really supports my channel. And leave me a comment down below with which one of these was your favorite, or if you think there's one that I missed that I should have included.
New workout idea? Move 1,000 plants back and forth across your house for a video.
This guy was supposed to be on the table.
A, I never notice how dusty my plant leaves are until I take close-up B-roll footage. And B, I just wiped a dirt smudge off my face that may or may not have been here the whole time.